Welcome to the Escology Podcast. This is Cliff, and I'm here with Ben and David Navone. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So if you're in car audio or car audio competition, you probably use something David was involved in, from Autosound 2000 to the Iaska discs, from stiffening capacitors to twisted pair cabling, in addition to other projects such as the MTX 1 million, which was a huge subwoofer inside of eventually a bread van, or aperiodic enclosures, among many other projects that have patents or otherwise. David's been involved in many of these things. Probably a lot of the people currently in car audio aren't quite fully aware of these projects and how they came to be, but we're really happy to have David here. And David, if you wouldn't mind going through some of your background. I mean, I believe you're a physicist, originally. How'd you end up in audio and car audio?
I started in car audio in 1963 with a buddy. We had a company called Custom Tapes by Dave and Harry, and they had 4-track tapes then. They just introduced them to cars, and a guy named Madman Muntz, who I knew, figured out that he could take elevator music and background music from department stores, and he could take that little machine and run it on 12 volts instead of run it on 120 volts AC, and put the darn thing in a car.
Oh, wow.
And so when he did, we had 4-track tapes. So very few people were making them. And so we figured out how to take a Sony 600 tape deck, which was a reel-to-reel, and record all 4 tracks at one time by gluing 2 heads together. And so we would charge back in 1963 $5 for a custom 4-track tape.
Nice.
And it was pretty cool. We still have quite a collection of them. If you didn't have a record, we would charge you 50 cents to use one of our records. But in 63, we did that. We got put out of business quickly because the record companies figured out that there were 4 of us up in this little town, and they invited us to a lunch, which we ended up paying our own for. And they told us that if we didn't cease and desist doing that, we would all be in jail and ruin our careers. I gave up the tape business, but because of that, in 1963, we were installing them. So I learned how to install things in cars. We put in Motorola reverb and things like that.
Right.
Going on a little farther, after college, I ranched and ended up selling a ranch. And I had an airplane business. We were doing airplane signs, and I sold it. Had a lot of cash around, so I bought a company that ended up doing car audio, and that was in 1978. And then I opened up a store and started writing columns in magazines around 1980. And there was a guy named Steve Weldon in Houston, Texas, Baytown actually, and he invited me to the first national Crank It Up contest is what it was called. And he said, I want you to be the head judge. You seem to understand what's going on. So I went down there, and guys like Wayne Harris, that's where I met Wayne. I don't know, it was 81 or something like that, way back then.
Right.
And I remember I wrote the rules for the Crank It Up contest on the airplane.
We'll figure it out.
We don't like noise. We'll figure it out. I think all the rules, 1 or 2 pages. I still found them somewhere.
Oh, wow.
I found those rules. And Steve had a huge contest. It was the first national one. He had it at the Astrodome, and it was gigantic. He had a whole section of cars. Some were loud and some were high-quality sound systems. And then he had vendors in there. He probably had 100 vendors. And it was like a mini consumer electronics show. Huge success, but the costs outweighed it, and it kind of hurt him financially. But that was the first Crank It Up contest for car audio on a huge scale.
And what year was that again?
Probably 81.
81?
81, 82, around there.
Wow.
I don't remember exactly, but he was the first one, and then he got copied. Somebody took his over, and it went wild from there. But that's where I met Wayne, and Wayne had a whole trunk full of capacitors. And there were a lot of characters there.
When I first really became aware of you was in the Car Sound forum days in the early 2000s, and you had a tech column there, as well as I believe Richard Clark had one as well. I think a lot of the projects that people have been really aware of in car audio were between you and Richard. And this isn't about Richard, but I mean, how did you two kind of hook up in working in car audio? Was that around 91 or so when you interviewed him for the magazine, or when did that happen?
In 1990, Ken would have the marketing, the technical seminar. He talked on something, and I talked on something. It was we hit it off, and we formed a company called Autosound 2000s then, and we decided to print a newsletter. And I think it was April of 1991 we had our first issue out, and then every couple months we'd do another issue. And we had quite a few subscribers. We would mail the magazine out and get it printed. And it was Richard was president of a huge company, and they had their own print business in the company.
Oh, wow.
And so Marty Porter came to us and said, how would you like to start your own magazine? We'll give you and Richard a percentage of it. So about 95, we quit our own little magazine, and we went over and started Car Sound magazine. And then he wanted a dealer magazine, so we did Auto Media magazine. And we did that for about 10 years, till about 2005.
You guys were involved in the Iasca competition discs for a while as well, weren't you?
Yeah.
What all did you do as far as the discs go? Did you do like all the technical tracks and the in-between stuff, or everything, or how were those compiled?
Richard did most of that.
Okay.
And we had a guy named Patrick Pruby that was just excellent at it. And we had an audio engineer named Brian. He was just super at it too. He'd sit there and listen to things all day long and pick them out. But Richard had a company that pressed the disc, so it was pretty easy.
Gotcha. Of the projects that you've done over the years, what are still the most exciting to you when you look back at them?
We did the stiffening capacitors. That was back in 91. And that worked out because the guy Anders, who I still share a facility with today, is my fraternity brother from college. Mike was building, he still builds today, audio amplifiers that use vacuum tubes in. He's under Quicksilver Audio. So he had a contract with Sprague to make giant capacitors. So Richard Clark designed 1 farad capacitor, and they couldn't build it, but they built a 100,000 microfarad cap.
Oh, wow.
And that was, and then we went up to 1 farad. That was about 91. And that was a good project. We did the twisted pair of cables, and that was a good project. One of the coolest things we ever figured out was if you had a 4-channel stereo and you didn't use the rear 2 channels for a sound quality vehicle, you could invert the back 2 channels and sum them with the front 2 channels and get twice the signal for nothing. But you didn't get twice the noise because the noise wasn't correlated. Only the signal was correlated. So it was like a easily patentable deal. No one had thought of it, but Richard and I thought of it over a phone call one night. And it was so simple. It was just invert 2 channels and sum them up, because you weren't going to use them anyway. And all of a sudden you got twice the signal.
Right.
But you don't necessarily have twice the noise. You did if the noise was correlated, but usually it's random on each channel. So that was a cool project.
You also licensed some of the twisted pair technology with Monster Cable, is that correct?
Yeah, Noel Lee. I met Noel Lee at my store in 1978, and he brought that giant speaker wire around. I almost laughed. I think I did laugh. I said, get that out of here. And my sales manager kept the roll. And a month later, Noel Lee came by, and he wanted to get paid. I said, well, where is that roll? And Tim goes, we sold the whole thing. I said, what? People bought that to the car. And I always tell that story. Noel, I worked with Noel for years, and that's it. I owed him for the whole roll, and it was double your money. And so if we paid $100 for the roll, we sold it for $200. It was a really good little deal. So that's where we got to be friends.
That's neat. Aperiodic enclosures. I know you had something to do with it, but how did you guys come up with that?
Richard came up with that one. That was his idea. He had a car, and he had one in his car, and it was a way to damp the speaker so that you didn't need a big box, because he hated big boxes in cars. So, and it worked out pretty well. Yeah. Anyway, Richard did the aperiodic stuff, and then I did the little circuits. We used to make them out here in California, and the circuit got you a perfect response without a box in the car.
I know you're still doing Navone engineering and that, but how have you seen the car audio industry change from your perspective over the past 20 years?
You can always add bass to a car, but the manufacturers got pretty smart, and they started adding pretty good bass. So the kind of stuff that Richard and I did pretty much went away, because you can't change the head unit anymore, and it's so much integrated into the function of the vehicle.
Right.
So I think the whole business changed dramatically. Now we're doing cell phone integrations and radar detectors, that kind of thing. So
Right.
it changed.
Right.
I'm going to interrupt because I want to hear about the MTX 1 million. I see pictures of that thing all over the web all the time. People are posting it, and I'm sure a lot of other people have seen it. But what's the backstory with that thing?
Well, Richard designed that thing. It's a 5-foot, 60-inch diameter honeycombed surface, and it's got a big inner tube tire running around it for a surround. The secret to it is it's mechanically connected to a motor, and the motor moves, almost 20 times a second, 6 inches. So X-Max is 6 inches. So that means every 20th of a second, it has to be back to where it started. And if you do the math, you're talking about 6 inches in a 20th of a second. It's almost the speed of sound, which would break the sound barrier. So it's just under that. And it moves so much air that one night in Greenville, South Carolina, it was raining. We were testing it in the parking lot of a motel. And it was so powerful. I was 40 yards away, and it felt like some wrestler had reached into my stomach and grabbed my spine and shook it 5 or 6 inches. And I mean, it makes you nauseous quickly. And then he couldn't turn it off, and some guy had an axe. We suspected that might happen. He had to cut the power cable because the contactor switch drew so much current that it arced. And so we fixed it, and the next day we brought it to the contest. They had an SPL section, and everybody went crazy and said, oh, my gosh, that doesn't have a brand name. It's a one-off deal, doesn't promote the business. So Lloyd Ivied over MTX says, it's the MTX 1 million or whatever he called it. So he put a name on it, and he said it's an MTX. So we put a decal on it. That's the only way we could demo it.
Nice.
Well, by then they kicked us out of the show.
Wow.
So we brought the van back, and it's still parked out there in Burlington, North Carolina in the field getting rusty.
Oh, man.
It'll still work.
It still exists?
Oh, yeah, it's sitting right there in the field.
That's
it's
awesome.
in a big bread tray. But it hurt. It really hurt.
I bet there were some challenges in making that thing come together.
Oh, yeah, it's got, it was like aircraft design. But Richard had a company called Concept Designs that had engineers that worked it out so that it didn't explode or break up or kill anybody. But I didn't get within 40 feet of it when it was running.
I heard there was, if I recall correctly, when they put it in the bread van and they wouldn't let you have it hooked up to the computer. It was like a servo drive or something. And
yeah.
Richard had to actually make contact for it by hand during the competition. Is that?
Well, we blew the switch up the night before, so yes.
That had to be scary.
A rainy Sunday morning in Greenville, no, we couldn't find a contactor switch. So yeah, Richard hotwired it, I guess you could say.
And you basically had no volume control on it, correct? It was pretty much just direct. At
below 20 hertz, volume's kind of
right.
What are you going to do?
So
it's moving so much air that all the area around it, that the van would flex. It was so incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, well, 5 feet diameter, and it's moving 6 inches in a 20th of a second. That's pretty fast.
Yeah, that's insane. So what are you doing these days?
Oh, I'm retired. I have a ranch in Waterloo, California, and we raise cherries out there.
Oh, nice.
And I still fool around with a few little circuits. Mike and I share a facility, the Quicksilver Audio guy, and we still do a few things on eBay, but basically retired.
Right. So enjoying life.
Yeah. I got 6 grandkids. One of my daughters is an executive over at Netflix, and she loves that. So she tells me all about the latest movies.
Right.
One of my daughters works in Washington, D.C., near the Capitol with a huge law firm. And the other daughter works as a intake for the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department.
Very cool.
So they're all families. Yeah, they're doing good.
What would you say are highlights as far as memories go in car audio? Because, I mean, you did a lot of things with it. And I know there's definitely always the untold stories of things that happened. But what actual, like, specific memories stick out in your head over the years?
Well, one was Lloyd Ivy said, I want to go win contests, and he was the first one. I mean, everybody, Kenwood, Pioneer, those kind of guys wanted to win, but Lloyd says, I got a lot of money to throw away at it, and can you guys set it up? And he made Richard and I a deal, and it was quite a bit of money, and we hired Mark Eldridge and said, Mark, how about a full-time job? We're just going to contest. And so we had a team that was pretty cool. It was dedicated guys. We got them the best equipment, and we got them tuned up and there at the contest, and shirts and hats and everything else. And the first year we won, and then we did it another year, we won. And Lloyd put displays in every Circuit City store in the nation. Look at this competition team. And that was a pretty good deal. It was not easy to do. And Mark Eldridge, got to give him a lot of credit. And there were a lot of other guys that helped Mark, but Mark put it together, and Mark's still doing it today. That
Absolutely.
was one of the highlights. A really, really cool thing to do. And Lloyd thought of it. He said, let's just go in.
There's a lot of the manufacturer direct stuff, but it doesn't seem like there was as many cohesive teams that were competing until that point. And then, of course, Mark went on to several teams after that, and then kind of went out on his own again. But that's cool.
Yeah, it was really cool thing to do. That was one of the good ones. We went to, Richard and I put on seminars all over the world. We went to Kuala Lumpur. I think Rockford Fosgate sponsored that one, or his dealer there did. And then we went to Australia, and we talked with Neville Teal at the same seminar, which quite an honor. He was the guy that set up television for New Zealand and Australia, and he's one of the Teal small parameters. He's the Teal part.
Right. That had to be exciting.
Elderly guy. It was quite a highlight meeting him.
Right.
He was a real character, by the way.
I bet.
He had some problems with authority, and so they farmed him over to a room and didn't let him do anything because he said, this is the way TV ought to done. You need more than 425 scan lines. And
Right.
Said, no, that's all we're going to have. So they farmed him over there. So he met this small guy, corresponded with him, and they worked out the Teal small parameters because he had gotten basically sidelined by the British government, Australian government.
And then TV finally caught up with him years later.
I was right. We need more than 425 scan lines. He goes, come on, America's got 525. Nah, that's all we're going to have.
Yeah, that's a dangerous statement right there.
Yeah, he was a great guy. That was a good highlight. And then we went, we've been Canada and all over the United States. We traveled, put on seminars. Richard's quite a guy for bringing equipment. I think we hauled probably 400 or 500 pounds of equipment with us to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Oh, wow.
Getting that through the customs and quite complicated.
How many people did you typically have in your classes?
50, probably 40.
Yeah. Pretty much anywhere you went. And what kind of was it mainly covering the basics, or I mean, what were you covering in the seminars?
We did everything. We did electronics. We did acoustics. Richard's really good on that. We did noise and isolation, things like that.
Okay.
And in America, we had 200. We would have 200 people at these seminars.
Wow.
But in foreign countries, they would kind of restrict them. And
I know there's been variations, and I'm sure you've seen even more variations than we have through the years. But as far as people using center channels versus not using center channels and surround sound in cars and that type of thing, it's used more now, I would say, because of the OEM market. But, in the aftermarket, it's not quite as prevalent. What are your thoughts on using more than, stereo speakers in a vehicle?
Oh, wow. The factories, the modern cars, wow, they really figured it out. And the sound stages seem to work. The bass moves up front. That was one of the things we did. If the woofer doesn't vibrate in the back, you can't tell where the bass is coming from. And if you had a really good sound stage up front, we had a way to make the bass sound like it was coming from the radiator of the car. And I noticed that some of the new cars, like the new Teslas, with their premium sound system, they have that effect built into them. And they added discrete speakers in the front of the car to get the sound stage. So yes, they put a center channel speaker in, but they also control it very cleverly so it doesn't blare. It blends in with the other speakers. They got some very sophisticated algorithms, but they
Absolutely.
work.
Is there anything you miss not being in car audio right now and being retired from it, or no? Yeah.
Yeah, I like taking out the factory unit, and putting in a really nice head unit, and working on them. We're not going to do that anymore.
Right.
So yeah, it's gone, and that's what I like doing that. We had a retail store for years, and some really good installer guys that were very clever. Now they're building boxes.
Right. No, I understand completely.
Well, I'm just kind of sad to watch the business come in and then kind of go away or morph into something that completely different than where it started from. But I remember fighting back in the 70s. We put money up to go fight the manufacturers because in 1978, Dodge made a teardrop opening to put a radio in their Dodge van, and it just ruined it because none of the head units would work. And so we went crazy. We just said, oh, God, they're going to do this to fight it. And they did it. They really did it so that the aftermarket couldn't put radios in. And we were arguing like heck with them. But Metra and Scotia, people like that, quickly came up with a kit to put a square radio in a teardrop hole.
Right.
Yeah, I remember arguing with it. But now it looks like they won. They integrated all the functions of the car into the radio, and it's pretty well done for new cars.
Yeah, I mean,
I've run into that.
There's a lot more involved in the integration and getting the aftermarket. If you still want to do it, there's plenty of ways to do it. But yeah, it's definitely more of an art form in integrating to the factory system.
I was just going to mention that my wife and I both recently bought new vehicles, and I'm battling the same thing with both of ours. They've definitely got everything integrated into the factory stereo. So you have to have an integration piece to pick up that signal post the source unit. And for instance, my wife's new car has an SPDIF cable, so optical cable, to a factory amp. So it comes out of the factory head unit optically and goes into the factory amplifier. So trying to grab that signal before the amplifier is going to be a challenge, to say the least.
It's going to be tough.
Yeah, it's interesting too to not only talk about the advances in technology and putting everything into the car radio, but if you go back to when you first started this discussion talking about reel-to-reel tape, making music that way, and then it's evolved to cassette tapes, 8-track prior to that, I guess, and then CDs, and now digital format. So we've gone from big, huge pieces of media to media that people keep on their telephone now. So it's just interesting to see things evolve.
The new Tesla Stream, they have streaming music. All you do is say the name of anything, including in Italian, and it plays it. And you can advance to the next song. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't know how that
you
works.
can do that with the iPhone and the Google devices now. You can do the same thing. You can say, hey, play XYZ, and it'll just start playing it. And you can say, hey, play the next song. And if it's playing an album, it'll just start playing the next song. It'll skip for you. So it's the hands-free aspect of that is really cool. It's, as far as a driving distraction goes. Yeah, just neat little things.
You can even thumbs down if you don't like some particular artist in some video.
Don't play that again.
Play that artist again.
Yeah.
And 8-tracks, we had to wait. You had to sit there and wait to hear the song again.
Hold up, let me rewind.
I was going to say, I mean, we didn't have track advance until CD players.
That's right.
Right? So even cassette tapes, you had to fast forward and find the start of the next song. So convenience factor has definitely gone up.
I would say on the social side, this is one thing that I'm interested in, because you did the trainings, you and Richard did the trainings and went all over the world, and you were involved with competitions way back, and Ben and I are kind of grew up in the internet world, but then you didn't really see a new product until you went somewhere. You met people when you went to these events. And I know, like I said, I first really knew about you from the Car Sound days and, the forums there and everything. So how would you say that the internet, just the connectivity of the internet, changed the climate of car audio from your perspective? Is there a social aspect there that you think changed car audio for the good or worse?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it's for the good, because we had huge well, you can reach a lot of people quickly, but it put the magazines out of business. And I did magazines from 78 or 79 all the way up to 2005. So, I mean, I kind of like not having a deadline or not having to edit something. It's kind of nice, but I did it for that many years and it all went away.
Yeah.
And so the internet took it over, and I just got sorry to see it go, but even Playboy magazine, it's dwindled to nothing.
Right. What are some of the more memorable interviews you did, or the articles that you were excited about doing through those years?
One of my first ones, a guy named Carl, I can't remember his last name. He owned Custom Autosound Manufacturing, and I went down there, interviewed him. He was in Walt Disney's office on Ball Road at Disneyland, across the street from Disneyland. And his vault was Walt's vault, where he had all the plans and stuff like that. But he figured out that the classic cars would benefit from putting a brand new Kenwood Pioneer Sony headpiece in them. And so he came up with a business to make those pieces look like the original 1949 Buick radio with push buttons, and he made them have cassettes and CDs and things like that. He was a very interesting guy.
Wow.
And he's still doing it for the classic cars. But that was a good interview. I did so many of them. Tom Walker at Audio Control, I've known him since he came down to that show. A lot of the Rockford guys. Geez, Richard and I were fortunate enough to get on the design team. Rockford decided they wanted to make a headpiece, and Richard and I helped them design it. And they had the first one made by General Motors, and we went to Matamoros, Mexico, and watched them make those headpieces down in across the border. And then we checked them out. They were a really, really good headpiece. We used them for our competition team, but the lights weren't bright enough in, and you couldn't read the lights in daylight at all, the LED.
Right.
So, which I had nothing to do with that part of the project. A lot of people wanted to get their money back on those. I had another good one. I remember back in the 70s, Madman Munch developed a burst mechanism, and they were called Munch 170 rooms. And they were incredible because the thing, when it got over, would go the other direction all by itself. And they built several thousand of them, brought them over. I sold them to all my friends. I probably sold 24 of them or so. And in 6 months, they all failed because the mechanism that determined the tension of the tape was unreliable. And he had to take them all back. I never forgot. One day he was trying to repair them, and he had these engineers from Japan in a room in San Francisco. And here's 200 radio cassette players clicking.
Oh, no.
Running around. They're all wired up to this giant 12-volt supply. And as soon as they click, the guy go over and tweak it, trying to refurb them and sell them, but it never worked. But it was the first auto reverse cassette in the world.
Wow.
Not good to be the first all the time.
Right. Sometimes let it work out and then perfect it so it works, right?
Are there any concepts or trends that you thought of as popular or should be popular way back when? I'm going to say that never really took off, but now have come back as new current trends. Oh,
for sure. MP3. I went crazy over that one. People, they got us on a committee to make high definition DVDs, whatever they call that, super DVD or something silly like that. And these guys they figured out that the sample rate at 20K was only 2 samples, and they wanted to put 100 of them up there or something. And they were making high definition things. At the same time, MP3 came out. And I sat in a room, we listened to these things, and nobody could tell the difference between the MP3 compression and the super DVDs. Isn't that what they called them? Super disc or something?
SACD?
Yeah. And I wrote articles about it, which weren't too popular. MP3 won, didn't it? They're just the guys that developed MP3. Well, they just said, and they go, well, the quality's better over here. Well, who can hear it? Let's do the test. So they do the test. Nobody could tell the difference. So, and if they could, they would just tweak the MP3 so you couldn't. That was the deal. I mean, they had MP2, MP1, but they said MP3.
Right.
Everything's MP3 now. You can't tell the compression. The satellite radio, that was another one that they were advertising CD quality. Well, there's not enough bandwidth to do that on a satellite.
Right.
So obviously it was compressed. And I I don't know if that company's out of the red yet, but I know they had to merge.
Yeah, they have not done nearly as well as I think they thought they would for the amount of money that was invested in both XM and Sirius, which, like you said, are now merged. What on the thought process of the SACD versus MP3, like you were talking, you'll hear a lot of people now that are on the high-res bandwagon that there's so many different technologies right now on that format. But, a lot of people will say that information supposedly contained between, 20 and 50K is what gives, the depth or the life or the, some kind of element to the music. And I'm sure you've heard that battle over the years as well. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I had to sit in the test. We put on a Surround Professional. I also worked in that industry, and we had a magazine called Surround Professional. We went to Trader Vic's, the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Hollywood, and we had a seminar there. And these guys brought a Super Audio CD demo down, and they had recorded some guy playing a violin in Hungary in a tunnel. And they had this thing. It was spec'd out to 100K. And they had to get permission from the hotel to shut off the air conditioning system because it was going to interfere with it.
Blow the hertz away.
I sat in the front row center, and they had these speakers that were worth something like $500,000, and the guy's moving them around. It was several channels. And after it was all sweating profusely. It's just so hot in that room. And he had to have the lights right. They put dimmers on the lights for this demo. And then he played this guy playing a violin that was, recorded with a cheesy microphone in some subway in Hungary. Isn't this wonderful? And they all sat around. And I remember I said, I think a Walkman or whatever we were using then, an iPod, and an MP3 player jammed into something would sound the same. And boy, they got mad. Oh, you don't know high quality. And I remember my partner, Richard, said he called it stupid audio CD. But I heard that demo. And these guys probably spent, I don't know, $50,000 or $60,000 for that booth. It was a 2-day show, and they brought it in. And then Dr. Chin from my town came to that same seminar, and he set up a 32-channel surround system that he did in his own studio. And he had 32 discrete channels, and he recorded the Stockton Symphony. This guy lived 2 miles from me in Stockton. He's still there. He recorded this entire Stockton Symphony in his recording studio at his house in 32 channels. And then he worked on this software to reproduce them, and he put 32 Genelec or Mayer speakers, studio monitors, 16 up high, 16 down low. And you can walk around the room, and it sound staged really well. You can walk toward the flute, walk toward the tubas. But what was the purpose? Is anybody else going to have a $3 million sound system to play it? He didn't do that day.
Along that line, again, this is another thing you've probably seen a lot of, and you've done tons of testing and building of things and everything else that most people haven't had the opportunity to do. But what would you say are some of the myths that kind of hold on with car audio that, people insist on repeating over and over and over again that, are disproven?
Well, there's a lot of those because I had a partner named Richard Clark who got his, what do you want to say, took on anybody, all challengers.
Right.
And I had nothing to do with me, but Richard loved the amplifier test. And I had to go along with these tests, and it broke people's hearts. I saw them come in, and they could tell their amp was sounded better than anybody else's amp. And we did hundreds of these tests where they had to pick their amp, and they had to do it every time, and nobody could do it. And so obviously the answer to the question is you can't hear the difference in an amp. But there's a lot of qualifiers there because some of these amps had built-in bass boost and things like that, and we'd take that out. We'd say, we're going to trim that till it's flat. And so we put equalizers in there. Oh, what do you mean? I said, well, your amp's got, at 40 hertz, it's got 6 dB of boost. Anybody going to hear that?
Right.
And so we took it out. Anyway, Richard loved doing that one. Speaker wires, a lot of guys said you could change the speaker wires or preamp cables and hear a difference. And of course, we tested that many times and disappointed a lot of people. And then Richard put up $25,000 of his money, not my money, and said anybody could hear it. I'm going to give you $25,000. He's got that test going to this day. You should call him, interview him. He's way better at this subject than me.
On the amplifier challenge, and again, I'm not holding you to this because, like you said, it's Richard's thing, not you. And of course, that's been a prevailing topic for years and years and years. People probably don't even know why Richard Clark is important, except they know that, he had this amplifier challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Was it, but obviously, you were involved with the test. Was it very much within confines of the limitations of the amplifier as far as output goes? Or did it run into distortion at all? Because, it seems like if you, and
no,
okay.
We'd never put them distort. No,
okay.
Of course, because all distort different.
Right.
And so we'd play them in their linear range, and we wouldn't let them have EQ, and that's it. Because there's some people that can hear a third of a dB
right.
at certain frequencies.
Sure.
And so we built this box that David Clark, no relation to either of us, designed. It's called the ABX box. And it decided if it was system A, system B, or system X. And X was determined by the computer. And so at the end, you could go back and forth, A, B, A, B, A, B, listen to this track, pick your song. And then at the end, the machine picked either A or B. And you didn't know. And you'd say, oh, obviously it's A. So you'd score it. And you had to do that 10 out of 10 times. Nobody ever did it. Richard had a guy that builds tube amplifiers 50 miles from him in North Carolina. This guy bought the factory, and he swore he could hear his own amps. They were better than everybody else's. I don't know what the bet was. It was huge. And that guy almost cried because he couldn't pick his amp during that test.
Man. So why do you think people believe they can hear amplifiers the way, because it's obviously, I would say the majority of people insist on saying that. So is it just because, they're hearing something louder, or because it's all just psychoacoustics, or?
I don't know. I'm a physicist, and if you could hear a difference in a wire, if you could hear that difference, how would the space shuttle ever get up there? How would the International Space Station work if a piece of wire could make a difference in something? And sure, if it's a radio frequency signal, you can have RG8, RG58, or a piece of wire. You're going to have a difference in it. But if it's just a piece of wire, it isn't going to make a difference. And these guys are hearing these differences. And I've seen guys spend $8,000 for a 3-foot set of RCA cables, and they do it all the time. They hook them up to their vacuum tube amps. But we would debug that. It's just so darn obvious. I don't know why they do that. They think they can hear their amp. Obviously you can hear speakers. There's huge difference in speakers, and there's huge difference in microphones.
Right. And
those transducers are where the errors are in the recording and the errors in the reproduction. They're huge. The distortion in a speaker and a microphone is gigantic, but there's no distortion in amplifiers or wires if they're played in a linear range.
Right.
Amplifiers. So
for those tests, were you playing music back in stereo with stereo speakers, or were you played a mono, track, or how?
Any way they wanted. If they wanted it in mono, we do it in mono. I think we could do it 4-channel if they wanted. It didn't matter, because you hear system A, you hear system
right.
B, and when they go back forth with this little switch, and they're ready to do X, boom, the computer picks randomly A or B, and that's it.
I actually saw someone had one of those switchers for sale on one of the car audio websites recently. I almost bought it.
Man, you should have.
I know, I really should have, but it was the AB. You could switch back and forth between AB, and then it had the X also, and then you had to choose. I think it had to be the same piece that you were doing these tests with.
Well, it's hard to make. The box has a random number generator in it, and all the connections have to be, there were silver contacts on the relays, and oh man. And then, you get experts, and they'd say, well, obviously your box has ruined the test.
Right.
Because then we had one guy one time, he just couldn't believe it. And he said, the thought of taking the test, just the process of it, has skewed the listening portion of my brain. So because I had to take a test, I can't do it right. But if you weren't giving me the test, I could pick my amp or my wires out anytime.
It's reverse psychoacoustics.
We heard them all. Or the guy had a cold or something, or the power isn't exactly right for the building.
Yeah, but if you have to get all those things in line in order to make your $50,000 amplifier sound right, then something's wrong.
Yeah, we didn't make any friends with that ABX box. That's why I've never seen anybody walk out of there happy. I mean,
Yay!
I mean, I see one guy crying. He's crying, and his wife's crying because I was sure I could do it. I could hear my amp anyway. I could tell what kind of amp it was just in the guy's car. Oh, you got this brand or this brand.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that, again, I have nothing against nice equipment. Obviously, spend what you want on what you want and makes you happy. But I've given lots of demos for people, it's from CES to car shows to whatever. And I've never ever had somebody get in the vehicle and go, "Oh, this track is from an MP3," or "Oh, you're using Class D amplifiers," or whatever. It's you either hear the music or you don't. And that's really what it comes down to. But people get very caught up in certain technologies and how they might affect how they're hearing things that might have less effect than they think.
Yeah.
Well, there's two aspects to this whole audio thing: home audio, car audio, whatever. There's, yes, you're in it because you love the music, but you're also in it if you're an quote audiophile. Part of that is being a gearhead and just liking new gear all the time and swapping gear and testing new things. And that's just part of the fun, I think, for a lot of people of being in the hobby.
That is correct. And you don't make any friends or sell products with those ABX boxes. You're not going to see any sales managers walking around with one.
Right.
And I see more people sad over those tests. But, it would take several hours to set the test up, get all that equipment right, get the room right, and it'd take half an hour to take the test. So it was not, I think we did 40 of them one time at one of our seminars. Everybody got a chance to do it.
Wow.
And, statistically, they all scored 50-50.
Yeah, that had to be frustrating for people, though.
Oh, yeah. You got to call Richard. He'd love to tell you about that.
The pain and misery.
Well, yeah, he's got that $25,000 waiting for you anytime you can do it. But they had to drive to him. He wasn't going to go anywhere.
Right.
And then he would spend some time. I said, you got to get $500 for your time setting the thing up. But he would do it because he was a fanatic at it. And he says, you're not going to hear a difference in a wire. You're not going to hear a difference in an amp if operated in the linear range. And the amp is linear. It doesn't have the bass or treble boosted or anything like that. And a lot of guys did.
Yeah. Well, it's, people want to have a justification for spending the money other than the fact that it's just more money in a different case. Rolex versus Timex.
Yep, exactly it. So
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you. It was great talking to you. I brought up some old memories. I haven't thought about it for a few years. So
awesome.
Okay.